Hello, BookTube. We're continuing on with my library tour. We're in the little book room, and we're just going through this west wall. We're in bookcase number 2, which is, as I mentioned yesterday, heavily literary. And by that, I don't mean novels about upper middle class Connecticut divorce. I mean books, about publishing, about writing, that sort of thing. I think they're almost unrelievedly that for quite a few more shelves. So just forewarned, those of you, I gave that warning for the history wall as well. Whenever there's a concentration of books, I want you to know ahead of time in case the concentration doesn't interest you. So let's start off. We don't have any transverse books this time around, which is good. I must be doing something right. I've got a little room in this room. Okay, the first one is another example. This is going to come up often here. An example of an author whose fiction I don't like, and whose nonfiction, especially whose nonfiction deadline prose, occasional prose, an editor comes to you and says, there's a new biography of Genghis Khan coming out, or we're putting together a new anthology of Charles Lamb's letters. Can you give us something? Can you give us an introduction? Can you write some notes or something like that? Or an editor will go to an author and say, I would very much like to send you a parcel of books, of review copies. And if anything in the parcel strikes your fancy, we'd love to have a review from you. Or a high-profile and very influential editor of a high-profile journal, like the New York Times Book Review, will write to an author and say, I would like you to review this. And it's just one book, and I'd appreciate it if you would say yes. So whatever the reason, whatever the way, throughout the course of the modern literary career, from Richardson and even before, authors have been presented with that and have done that kind of work. First-rate authors, second-rate authors, even third-rank authors have done tons of that, and almost none of it, in the vast scope of what has been written, almost none of it has been collected. So, you know, I go to that stuff without fear or favor. I don't gauge it by whether or not I like the author's fiction. And very often it's the case that I will like their occasional prose, their essays, and their book reviews better than I like anything they wrote as a novel. And that's definitely true of this author. This is John Updike. This is Due Considerations. He has many, many volumes of his collected. He never turned down a commission to do this sort of thing, and was never short of being asked. People asked him all the time for a nice, welcoming introduction to something or other. This is a trade paperback. I don't think I have this as a hardcover, but I know that I have more Updike. It should all be together, but I know that I have more of it in this section of the library. And the neat thing is, because I don't have any transverse books, I don't have to do any juggling. I can just take them off the shelf, almost like a normal library tour. I can just take them off the shelves and put them right back where they were, which is the way all the books in my collection should be. There shouldn't be anything stacked. You run the risk of having a book get cocked if it's stacked. Every book should have its place on a shelf. It should be consulted enough so that that place is warranted, and so that it doesn't make any sense to stack books on top of it. If you have books, I'm preaching mainly to myself here, but nevertheless, if it applies to you, feel free. If you have books that you don't consult often enough to make you worry about whether or not they are stacked and buried and inaccessible, then you shouldn't have that book in your library. Then you shouldn't have it in your personal library. It might be a book that you like. Sure thing. There are plenty of books that you like in the world. Doesn't mean you keep it. You keep the books that you use and consult, the books that you love, the books that you are in love with, not just, I have a fond memory of having read you 50 years ago. Anyway, I don't worry about that with this shelf, so I don't know what set that off. This is another example of the same thing. This is G.S. Street from the early part of the 20th century. This is a book of essays, and these are, had I had a BookTube channel back in 1915, I would have said, oh, I wouldn't call these essays, because these are mostly the same thing, for money, deadline prose. If I remember correctly, the first chunk is about London, the London of his day. Utterly fascinating. It's a London that's almost all gone, so it's utterly fascinating. And then the middle chunk, the chunk that I often consult the most, is all the literary stuff, and with, you know, pieces on Byron, for instance. He's a pretty good writer on Byron. And then I think there's a third section of just Miscellany, and that is a telltale sign that this was made, that it was pulled together by an author who knew that he had all his prose out in the world and was hoping for a book. I really need to do that myself. I need to do that many, many times. There should be a year in reviews 2018, a year in reviews 2017, a year in reviews 2016, a year in reviews 2015. The news from Abu Dhabi. There should be book notes from an island where I collect and contextualize all of my Martha's Vineyard Gazette reviews. Many, many, many possibilities. Book notes from the Heartland. I reviewed books a million years ago all through the Midwest. I could somehow collect all of those and write about them. Not just collect them, but write about them. Put them in a bigger context. Make it all very interesting. I should be doing that. And these books will remind me, and I will remind you. This next one's a classic. And this is University of Florida. University Press of Florida came out with this lovely edition. God help us. This is Poetry in the Age by the great Randall Jarrell, who will turn up again, I'm sure, in this tour, but you have got to have this book. You have got to. I don't say that about most of the books on this shelf, in this bookcase even. Most of it is, I realize, fairly specialized. Most of it goes straight to the heart of what I do for a living, and these things, this part of the library will be extremely representative of my own personal tastes. But Poetry in the Age is a classic of American 20th century nonfiction. And if you have not made Randall Jarrell's acquaintance as a critic, as a writer, as an explicator of contemporary poetry, the contemporary poetry of his day, mid-20th century poetry, you are missing out on one of the century's signature voices. I cannot recommend him highly enough, and I feel certain a lot of his stuff, his letter collections, all that sort of stuff, a lot of it's probably gone. But Poetry in the Age is eternal. There will always be some editor somewhere at some university press, God bless them, who will say, well, there's got to be an edition of that in print. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the New York Review of Books, their classics line, does an edition of Poetry in the Age. One way or another, the point I'm trying to make is that there will be editions available for you with a minimum of hunting and a minimum outlay of cash. Got to read this book. I don't know that there'll be more than 3 such things anywhere in this entire bookcase that you have to read. Notice I didn't say it about Elizabeth Hardwick, who I love with the passion. And if you are, God forbid, in book reviewing, if you actually do book reviewing, I don't think there's anybody who watches me who does that aside from maybe Sam Sachs. No, actually, there are 2 or 3 book critics that I know who watch this channel. But other than that, I wouldn't say, other than to them, I would say, of course, you have to read Elizabeth Hardwick. You have to know her. Even if you're dabbling in book reviewing, you have to know her. But otherwise, no. I didn't tell you. This, I'm telling you, all bookish people must read Poetry in the Age. It is an amazing, amazing, protracted meditation on poetry. Let's see here. All right, I just talked about this guy just the other day. This is the late, great Robert Hughes. And this is his great book on modern art, Nothing If Not Critical. He was a spiky, opinionated champion of modern art, the stuff that I have many times on this channel characterized as charlatanry, as pure garbage, pure junk. He brought to bear a big, muscular brain to examining that sort of stuff, and knew the world inside and out, knew everyone involved, all the auctioneers, all of the housemasters, all of the artists, all of their agents, all of their wives and spouses. And there's no more brilliant a writer on these artists that I consider to be absolute frauds. So this is a weird feeling of a book for me to read. And I reread passages from this all the time because Hughes is so good. I reread passages from it all the time, even though I don't care anything at all about the artists. It's a kind of weird feeling. This next one. Oh my. Okay, this is from, what is the date on this? I don't want to get all Jason Harrigan on you, but some of the books in my collection are old. Jason Harrigan, remember, he renamed his channel Byways in Bookland. It's still out there, but I can't help but notice that his subscriber count has not recovered from changing the name of his channel. That's why I never advise people to change the name of their channel. I don't think subscriber count matters to him any more than it matters to most of us in this little corner of BookTube. But nevertheless, I have a feeling that in his case, a lot of those subscribers loved what they were getting and don't know that he's elsewhere. So Byways in Bookland. is the name of his new channel. And he's an antiquarian book dealer. He knows everything there is to know about books, both cocked and uncocked. And he's constantly on his channel showing old books. And some of mine are old, but I don't care about them the way he does at all. I care about them. I read them until they fall apart. I don't pay any attention to them, to their shape. This is an older book. This is from 1940. So not as old as a book of essays, for instance. G.S. Street is much older, 50 years older. But this is by Alice Hagen Rice, and this is The Inky Way. And this is a literary biography of an author who's now completely forgotten. She wrote Mrs. Higgs of the Cabbage Patch, sort of a young person's book. Mrs. Higgs of the Cabbage Patch. She wrote a bunch of other stuff too, but that book was a hit. It was dramatized on stage. It was Bowdlerized. It was plagiarized. It was reprinted 1 million times. It was translated into every language in the world, including Braille. It was an enormous, enormous hit. It made her as a literary figure, and it's now gone completely. I think the dust jacket of this book compares it to Dickens. Yeah, and the character of Mrs. Wiggs is said to be one of 7 that America has given to the literary picture gallery of the world. As well known as Mr. Micawber, she is better loved. She's totally forgotten, completely forgotten, and this is delightful. I read Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch a long time ago, and I also read a couple of others of her books. They're pure treacle. They're just unbearable. But this is a wonderful book, really spry, very sharp eye for the literary world of her day. And she came from, a tiny town in the middle of nowhere in America. She wasn't born to the literary blood or anything like that. So it makes her story all the more fascinating. Okay, this is Edmund White. He was bound to make an appearance here. This is the Unpunished Vice, A Life of Reading. And this is all about his literary life, and also lots and lots of repurposed occasional prose of his own. Not a very big book. When I heard about this originally, this came out, I think, 4 years ago. No, this came out in 2018. I was hoping that it would be much, much bigger. This is a very canny author, an author who's very canny about managing his own literary legacy, so there could be such a gigantic book coming. He's very interesting. He doesn't... I can't take a whole lot of rereading his literary essays in a row, but I do love sitting down with him. They're richer, more contextured, more Parisian than a lot of the stuff that I'm showing you here. Okay, this is a collection of reviews and occasional writing by Joyce Carol Oates, uncensored, and it is another example of a case where not as bad an example as John Updike, because I like Joyce Carol Oates. I like her fiction, often I do, but I like her nonfiction much better, much better. So I come back to her all the time for this. I come back to all of these things all the time. Okay, this is a reprint of The Pleasures of Reading. This is edited by Antonia Fraser. Just has a whole bunch of authors on the joys of reading, a fairly predictable kind of anthology, but I don't have many of them. Now this I wish I could find. Someday or other I will find this with a reinforceable dust jacket at the Brattle, and I will do that. I will reinforce it so that I can see this just on the shelf. This is Gil Hyatt, and this is a Clark at Oxenford. This is a collection of literary reminiscences of his. As the subtitle is Essays on Literature and Art. Often that is the case with these things. The authors will give it sententious titles like that to give the illusion that this has been under planning all the time, when really it's just, I've got a bunch of stuff that's now mine. The typical rule of thumb for 200 years has been that the journal where your work first appears has the rights to it for a month, 2 months, maybe, something like that. At the outside, 2 months. Under the assumption that you can't print it anywhere else, and neither can anybody else. It belongs to them for as long as it's current. And the assumption is that if it's a review or an essay about some new book, some new trend, some new reprint, no one will care about it after that much time. So then it becomes the author's property again. They can do what they want. And most authors presented with that bounty, what is, after all, a book's amount of work that's now theirs, most authors will try to make a book deal out of it somehow or other. And again, that's what I intend to do. I have what, 15 years of, even if we count just phase 2 of my reviewing career, just from 2016. Okay, so not 15 years. 2000, no, not 2016, 2007. 2007 to we are all almost now in 2020. That's 13 years worth of stuff. And it's a huge amount of stuff. I am an extremely prolific reviewer. So that's I am in the same position as almost all of the people that we're seeing here, where I'm saying, in addition to what I'm going to write for NaNoWriMo or the great memoir that I hope to write someday, there's also all of this prose that is mine and that I could easily repurpose for general reading interests. So, okay. All right. This is a joy, an absolute joy. This is B.R. Myers, and this is A Reader's Manifesto. This is the book-length elaboration of a long essay that he did for where did he do that essay? You'd think I'd remember because I loved it so much. The Atlantic Monthly. He did it for the Atlantic Monthly. And the essay was one in which he utterly eviscerates the contemporary fiction of his day, just rips it to shreds. Not in the sense of I didn't get this, not in the sense of it's not my cup of tea, but on the sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, idiocy by idiocy level. Beautifully, beautifully done. An absolute marvel of a takedown of a book that he then of an essay that he then expanded into a book. And some of his targets are some of my targets and have been forever. And it led to a lot of people in my life wondering if I was B.R. Myers. I am not B.R. Myers. Apparently, some of the people 10 years ago, 15 years ago, who were delighting in that essay, oh my God, when that essay first came out in the Atlantic, all I got, phone messages, letters, all I got was people saying, is this you? Because it's just faintly possible that at one period or another in my life I have written things under pseudonyms. It's just faintly possible that I have done that. Perhaps a lot of things under pseudonyms. And so people were wondering, is this you? Because this reads like you. And yeah, all the villains are the same. But no, it's not. It's a joy, an absolute joy for me. All right. This is one we saw just recently. I am always on the lookout for books to come into this room. This little book room is the heart and soul of my reading life. If I had to get rid of, all but one room full of books, this is the room full of books that I would keep, and I would get rid of the others, much as I love them. And I'm always on the lookout. There's nothing frozen about this. I periodically do, very slowly, I periodically wean books out of here. And I also add books to here. And this is one that we saw just recently. I found it at the Brattle and grabbed it right away for this room. This is Nancy Mitford, the inimitable, thank God, Nancy Mitford. This is a talent to annoy. Essays, articles, and reviews. Mostly not any of those things. Mostly the book is full of her elaborate, whiny, and sometimes hilarious justifications to various long-suffering editors for why she wasn't producing essays, articles, or reviews. I don't know what any editor would have to be thinking to commission anything from any of the Mitfords. But nevertheless, what is in here is absolutely delightful. Annoying, yes, because it's often a writer just high-handedly dismissing her subject, obviously without knowing anything about it, but still enjoyable. Okay. All right, well, this doesn't belong here. In fact, I will set this aside because this is clearly out of place. It's hilarious, but it's out of place. This is a short illustrated book, a bit of tough love, from Volker Kriegel called The Truth About Dogs. That is... it's pretty brutal. Dogs have fleas. Dogs are vulgar. Dogs fart. My favorite one in here is Dogs Fart. And it's I wonder if I can find it. Yes. Look, it takes a minute for the full import to come through to you. That is Dogs Fart. They're both looking across the room at the dog, but it takes you a minute. If you didn't see the little subscription, it would take you a minute to realize what the point was. They do. I can attest to the fact that they do. Although it varies, I should say. It varies from size and it varies with breed. Every once in a great while, every once in a blue moon, Frida will eat too much too fast. And she will, when she's sound asleep, come out with this little thing. Beep. And maybe in the air, a minute later, there will be the faintest, the quickest, briefest hint of eau de dog food, and then it will be gone, and all that will be left is spring breezes. And when I compare that to the matter-antimatter chain reactions that Lucy, my basset hound, used to give out, where guests would have to go outside, where I used to say that she just ripped off a fart so strong that it's changed the color of my eyes, or that it's changed the clocks back to daylight savings time. Sometimes with Lucy, you could hear them coming for 15 minutes, and there was no escape. There was no way to get around it. Anyway. Oh, great. All right. This is another book, all about the love of reading, all about the author's favorite books. This is a reprint that came out from the Common Reader edition. I don't have an older version of this. There are older versions of this that look a lot like these old books that I get at the Brattle, but I don't have one of those. Instead, I have this little paperback. This is Through the Magic Door by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And it is his love letter to reading. It's his love letter to his favorite authors, his favorite books. Delightful. Oh, okay. And this is the same thing. This is Anne Hood, the author Anne Hood. This is Morningstar, Growing Up with Books. So this came out in 2017. So those books are separated by 100 years. And it's amazing the similarities and the insights that they have. These authors who can't imagine their lives without books. How true is that for BookTube? Wonderful, great. And then we're at the end. We're actually at the end of this extremely well-behaved shelf. That's wonderful. That is wonderful. I wonder why I don't have any transverse books here. It seems very strange. The space is at such a premium in this little room. This is a commemorative volume. I don't know if anybody does these things anymore, or if not, I don't think this was ever meant for publication. I mean, for general circulation. This used to be the kind of thing that would be in boardrooms, that would be handed out to lifetime employees. Companies don't have lifetime employees anymore. But this is 125 years of publishing. A commemorative volume from Little Brown that is all about their years in Boston. Just a cute little thing. Of course, the type of thing that I would find, especially at the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston, which is where you'll find stuff like that, where you won't find it anywhere else. And then again, I mean, most of the names in there are gone to history. No one remembers them at all. But it is a glimpse of the publishing industry at a time that doesn't resemble anything like that now, and it's also a glimpse of Boston. At a bygone Boston, a Boston that does not exist anymore. So there you go. That's another shelf. That's shelf number, what did we do? That's number 2 in this second bookcase. As we creep our way around the little book room here, we have a lot more books about books to go. So I hope you're okay with that. But I'm going to wrap this particular video up for now. I'll be back though. We have plenty of other bookish stuff to talk about. So I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.